No update. Just felt a little something in her groin, so we'll get it evaluated and see what happens from there.
Caitlin Clark's career has taken off. Superstar status, sparking the WNBA's. Her vehement defense of Lexie, her colleague, Hull. Fans are roaring at her audacious stance, and the buzzing sports world, launching her into a multi-million-dollar, $1 spotlight. This thrilling moment reveals unadulterated devotion and desire that changes the game. However, what precisely? What caused Caitlin to lose her temper? How? Will her legacy change as a result of this huge deal? Let's get started and see why she's changing the basketball rules. Fame. The setup of the Indiana Fever to fail. Whenever the Indiana Fever takes onto the court, they seem to be going into combat rather than a game of basketball. There are bruises on the bodies. Players sustain a lot of injuries, up so frequently that it has nearly become into standard. The worst part is how not much appears to be done to keep them safe. There is no genuine mechanism or safety net in a location to halt the mayhem. It's a severe circumstances in the WNBA. After one game, another causes harm to someone, and Indiana has endured more suffering than anybody else. Now, imagine getting ready to confront one of the league's most formidable opponents while over half of your roster is absent. It is not hyperbole. That's precisely what it is. What happened in Indiana? Their star, Caitlin Clark, had to miss time due to a groin ache that has persisted for more than a month. For the season, Sophie Cunningham is absent, whose medial collateral ligament is torn. Sydney Carlson, a terrible frontrunner. She ended up with a cruciate ligament injury. Campaign. Leaving Aari McDonald indefinitely, with a foot fracture, and just prior to, Chloe Beebe was ruled out in another important game, absent due to a knee ailment. Overall, 5. The lineup was stripped of key players, resulting in the roster being as small as paper. The strain on the players who are left. It was almost impossible. Sims for Odyssey, brought in under contract for hardship, essentially served as the backup to the backup, to Caitlin Clark's backup. However, she was far from being healthy, too. Fighting. Sims had no business dealing with her own injuries, lying on the ground. However, the roster. She was so nude that she had to crawl into the match. That in and of itself says a lot. Just how dire the circumstances have become. This ongoing barrage of injuries is not merely misfortune. It almost feels supernatural. Each day brings. A Fever player was reported to have marginalized. Furthermore, it's not only about absent stars. It concerns how these injuries tear away the basic framework of the group. Wings, shooters, guards, all. In a flash, it was gone. Consequently, Lexie Hull and Kelsey Mitchell bears no two burdens. Shoulders should never be required of athletes. In the match against Minnesota, Hull had to play 37 grueling minutes and score 23 goals. Points as pure rather than as a luxury. Survival. Additionally, Kelsey Mitchell gave all of her possessions, losing 26 points, while engaging in combat with multiple squads and smothering protection. However, while you're depending on weary bodies to do almost every possession throughout the game, turns into a mountain, and the repair. There weren't many better solutions. The group was impulsively signing players, occasionally within a few hours of a tip. Petty hardly had time to get her bag unpacked prior to being included in the rotation. Still limping, Odyssey Sims was anticipated to maintain the offensive momentum. Aerial Powers was quickly and late at it, forced into lengthy periods of time without any her new teammates' chemistry. It was disorder on the court, a bunch of strangers, compelled to gel instantly while there. Every error was exploited by the opposition. Even head coach Stephanie White acknowledged the obvious. The level of physicality her weakened troops faced was far beyond what they could realistically handle. Every drive to the basket cost them more energy. Every defensive stop felt like a war. The players were battling with dignity, but with such thin depth, even the fundamentals become tiring. Yet somehow, despite all this, they kept battling. That's the thing about this Fever squad. They wouldn't give up, regardless of how unfavorable the odds were against them. But this is where the tale becomes more sinister. As vicious as the injuries weren't the most. The night's destructive factor.
What?
More than missing, Indiana was crushed. Half of their roster consisted of items that it shouldn't have been an issue. The referees, the individuals intended to uphold equity and safeguard the athletes who appeared oblivious to the penalty. Indiana won. Strikes to the face interaction. That obviously left players stunned. Ignore the fouls. Repeatedly, the whistle never came. It resembled the Fever wasn't merely battling their adversaries. They were engaged in combat with the officials as well. Once after, fans were left after another crash, shocked as there was no call. The participants' anger was evident, yet there was nothing they could do. This wasn't merely basketball no more. It was a matter of survival, combined with unfairness. The Fever wasn't only outmanned, they were weakened. Additionally, as the game progressed, the question became louder. Were the referees present, just not getting calls? Or did it exist? Is there something more profound going on here? Referees who purposefully work against Fever in Indiana? Is there any chance that didn't the stripes look anything but neutral? Remain. Stay closely, as what follows will compel. You should doubt everything about this game. The referee's actions against the Indiana Fever. What occurs when the referees no longer act impartially and instead begin influencing the game itself. That's what the Indiana Fever encountered in a match that astonished spectators and players are furious. Already, Lexie Hull, carrying a big load with a lot of teammates, moved into her place and sidelined her, playing the defensive against Kayla McBride. It appeared to be a typical struggle for position. McBride then swung her arm through using force rather than passing by her. An elbow struck Hull in the face. Hull fell immediately, holding her jaw, and all onlookers believed the choice was obvious. This was the type of hit that flagrant yell. However, the reality was flipped by the whistle that followed. Inverted. Amazingly, the officials. McBride was not penalized for the elbow. They whistled Hull instead, the very player who was struck, as though she was in some way to blame for it. The audience let out a gasp. Commentators played back the Fever and the moment of disbelief. Bench sat stunned and motionless. Play it again after. The elbow connect was shown on replay. Squarely. However, the officials doubled, ignoring their request, considering Hull as the guilty party. The review was anticipated by fans. Technique to tidy up the debris, but that simply made the frustration worse. Slowly. Motion, it was impossible for the evidence to more precise. McBride's swing was straightforward. Hazardous touch on Hull's face. However, the referees refrained from calling a complete penalty. They made a small adjustment. The call, admitting that something is amiss, occurred, but McBride was not held genuinely responsible. For many, it seemed like one side was being protected by the system itself, while punishing the other. The level of inconsistency was astounding. Hull was left to nurse her face. Indiana was defeated. Ground on the links and scoreboard. Accelerated. Due to a whistle that appeared to be more about preserving appearances rather than phoning play the game fairly. How would you describe that? How do you defend the victim's punishment rather than the one who attacked? Commenters were unable to conceal their incredulity. Boom. There in the face, one remarked, highlighting what Everyone was able to see. On social media, even louder was the response. Fans of Fever exploded in rage, yelling a expanding trend. As soon as Indiana players are hit hard, whether it's shvees, elbows, the whistle, or body checks, hardly ever works in their favor. In the meantime, physical play is tolerated by opponents. It appears to be made to wear the Fever down. And now for the more serious problem. This isn't occurring to a team that is completely healthy. The roster of Indiana is already weakened, with players leaving one after another because of wounds. Each and every foul that is not called, each and every brushing hit, provides gasoline to a flame that fans perceive has been blazing for weeks. When half your roster has been sidelined already, referees are the last item you can afford, allowing opponents to add to the pile. Escape punishment for violent contact. The physicality of Minnesota wasn't intrinsically the issue. Many teams exploit harsh play to their benefit. The uneven way it was the issue. Condemned. There were Fever drives into the paint. Without a whistle, the minor swallowed. Bumps on the opposite end immediately. Fouls. Stephanie White, the head coach, even following the game, alluded to this disparity. She speaks carefully, but clearly in her significance. Her group wasn't being served on an equivalent scale to their adversary. To both players and spectators, the message seemed clear. Indiana wasn't. They were only fighting the Lynx, fighting the officiating as well. Additionally, in the pivotal moment involving Hull on the floor, the officials didn't simply overlook a